Hello, Virgo. Let's go straight into it. Uh, Something burned away, not destroyed, burned away. The distinction matters because burning away is not destruction, it is clarification. Fire removes what is not essential, it cannot remove what is. What remains after fire is what was always structurally real, what was never dependent on the accumulated surface of the thing for its existence, what needed the burning to become visible as itself rather than as the thing, plus everything that had been layered over it. The person approaching you right now has been through a fire, not a dramatic one, the slower kind, the kind that happens in the ordinary friction of daily life when someone is being asked to be two things simultaneously and the two things are incompatible and the incompatibility generates a heat that eventually, without ceremony, burns away one of them. What burned away was the caring about what others think. Not in the performative way of someone who announces they no longer care in order to communicate something to the people whose opinions they are claiming to have transcended in the actual way. In the way of something that was genuinely present and genuinely consuming resources and genuinely shaping behavior, the monitoring of external perception, the adjustment of expression and action based on the anticipated judgment of people whose judgment was being accorded more weight than it deserved, and then at some point in some private moment that looked from the outside like any other moment, simply stopped being the primary variable. The fire finished. What remained was you. Anymore. That word is the whole history. Anymore means there was a before in which the caring was present and operational and exerting its specific, shaping pressure on what this person was willing to express. A before in which they felt something for you, felt it clearly, felt it fully, felt it in the specific, undeniable way of feeling that refuses to respond to logic or to the management strategies a person deploys when they are trying to not feel something, and then looked at that feeling and looked at the landscape of opinion surrounding them and calculated the cost and decided, consciously or not, that the cost was too high to pay in that moment. That the exposure required by the expression of the feeling exceeded what the current conditions could support. So they held it, not forever as it turned out, but for a stretch of time that had its own texture and its own cost. The cost of holding something that does not want to be held, that presses against the holding, that makes its presence known in the specific, inconvenient, will not be managed ways of feelings that have been told to stay quiet and are not staying quiet. The cost of monitoring the external landscape and finding it hostile or uncertain or complicated in ways that made expression feel dangerous. The cost of being around you, possibly with the full force of what they feel present in them, and the full force of the not expressing it also present. The two forces running simultaneously in a body that was never designed to hold them both indefinitely. Anymore ended the holding. The before is over. I don't care. Three words that contain in this specific context, the entire journey from the before to the now. Not indifference, the opposite of indifference. The specific freedom of someone who has moved through the caring what others think to the other side of it, who has felt the full weight of the external judgment, has sat with the anticipated disapproval, has run the calculation of what the expression would cost them in terms of the opinions of specific people in specific circles, and has found at the end of the calculation that the number is acceptable, that what they would lose is less than what they are currently losing by not saying anything, that the version of their life in which they said nothing and maintained the comfortable opinions of everyone around them is less livable than the version in which they said everything and lost whatever opinions could not survive the honesty. That calculation is not easy to arrive at. People spend years not arriving at it, decades sometimes, carrying the unexpressed thing and the weight of the external perception management simultaneously, getting older, the unexpressed thing aging with them, the weight not lightening. Some people never arrive at it, reach the end of the time available, and find that the calculation was never completed, that the expression was never made, that the caring what others think retained its position as the primary variable until the time for the variable to matter was gone, is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than this person arrived at it. For you, in the context of you, in the specific personal, this particular feeling for this particular person calculation that produced a result that previous calculations about other things in other contexts had not produced. You were the one who broke the calculation, who made the cost of silence finally, definitively, undeniably higher than the cost of speaking. I love you, said, not held, not coded into the carefully managed warmth of an expression designed to communicate feeling without the commitment of the actual words, not implied, not left legible only to someone paying the specific forensic quality of attention that reading between lines requires, said directly, in the form of the 3 words that do not permit the comfortable ambiguity of something that can be received as more or less than it is, in the form that changes the architecture of the space between 2 people permanently, because once said, it exists in the shared record, cannot be retrieved, cannot be qualified back into something smaller, cannot be made into a thing that one party holds and the other does not know about. It is in the shared record now. And the shared record is different because of it. Every interaction that preceded this and that will follow it is now understood differently by the fact of the 3 words existing in the space between you. The before they were said version of the relationship and the after they were said version are not the same relationship in the same state. They are different relationships, sharing the same people and the same history and the same accumulated texture of everything that happened before the words, but organized around a completely different central fact. The central fact is the love, said out loud, no longer only theirs to carry. And I will prove how important you are. This is where it stops being declaration and becomes commitment. This is the part that separates the expression of feeling from the sustained behavioral show up over time expression of what the feeling means. Because love said is the beginning. It is not the proof. The proof is what comes after the saying in the specific, practical, this is how I treat someone I love quality of what the days following the declaration contain. In whether the love said becomes love demonstrated, in whether important to me becomes visible in actions that could only come from someone for whom you are actually important. Proof is different from declaration. Declaration requires a single act of courage. Proof requires sustained attention, repeated choice, the willingness to show up in ways that cost something in terms of time and energy and the specific vulnerability of someone who has made their feeling visible and is now choosing every day to continue making it visible through behavior rather than retreating to the more comfortable position of having said it once and leaving it at that. Proof is the long work, the unglamorous work, the work that most people, when they have made a declaration and received some form of acknowledgement, would prefer to consider completed. The work that the person making this commitment to you is undertaking as its own separate, sustained, this is how I show you rather than tell you project. Watch for the proving, not the grand gesture. The gesture happens once, and then the question of proof returns the next day. Watch for the pattern, for the repeated small choices that add up to a consistent direction. For the behavior that makes sense only if you are actually important, not important in the social you matter to the group way, but important in the specific this person has organized their attention around my well-being way. The way that requires them to think about what you need before being reminded, to remember the things you said and reference them later, to show up in the specific, particular ways that correspond to who you actually are, rather than the generic version of caring that is the same for everyone. That is the proof. That is what important actually looks like when it is real. The others, the people whose opinions were the before, the ones whose judgment was the variable that shaped the expression of this feeling for long enough to have shaped how this arrived to you late, possibly, in the form of a declaration rather than the quieter, more gradual expression it might have been if the variable had been removed sooner. They are still there. The others do not disappear because one person decided to stop centering their opinion. They continue to hold their opinions. They continue to express them through whatever channels they use to express opinions. They continue to be the social landscape in which this person lives and moves and makes their choices. What changed is not them. What changed is the weight accorded to them, the position they hold in the internal hierarchy of what matters. They moved from the primary variable to a variable among many present, acknowledged, occasionally relevant, not determining, not the thing that decides whether the love gets expressed, not the thing that decides whether the proof gets offered, not the thing that stands between this person and you in the specific physical, I am choosing to be here way of someone whose choice to be here was previously conditional on the approval of people who are not here. The condition was removed. Not because the others became irrelevant in some global sense. People and their opinions are never fully irrelevant to the people who love them. But because the specific question of you exceeded the specific weight of them, because this person looked at the balance and found it finally, clearly, unambiguously tipped in one direction, in your direction, past the point where the others could tip it back. What you do with this, nothing immediately. Let it land. Let it be what it is without immediately processing it through every relevant piece of history and every legitimate concern and every reasonable question about what it means for the future and whether the proof will actually materialize and whether the others will stay managed or will find new forms of influence, and whether the fire that burned away the caring really burned it away or only appears to have burned it away, because the conditions that would test the burning have not yet arrived. All of those questions are real. All of them will require addressing over time, but not right now. Right now, there is a declaration that costs something real to make. That arrived from a place this person has not been before, the other side of the caring what others think. The place where the love is the primary variable and the opinions are the secondary ones. The specific clarity of someone who has finally arranged their interior hierarchy in the order that was always true, but that had been obscured by the accumulated weight of the external. Right now, there is this: someone looked at everything that stood between them and saying, I love you, and they said it anyway. Let that be what it is, for long enough to actually receive it before the questions, before the history, before the legitimate and necessary processing that will follow, just for a moment. Let the declaration exist in the space it was placed in without immediately filling that space with everything else. Someone loves you and has stopped pretending they don't in order to keep the peace with people who are not you. That is what happened. That is the whole of the message. Not complicated, not requiring interpretation, not dependent on reading between lines or inferring from behavior or assembling the accumulated evidence of 100 almost said things into something that can be called a conclusion. Just said. Someone loves you, and they said it, and they are going to prove it. In the sustained behavioral show up every day in the specific ways that matter to you sense of proof that does not require grand gestures, because the love is not a grand gesture. It is a fact, a private fact that became a shared one when the fire finished and the caring burned away, and the thing that remained that was always going to remain, that could not be burned away because it was the structural thing, the real thing, the thing that the fire was revealing all along, stood in the open and said your name, out loud. Finally, without asking anyone's permission,